Don't just stand there. There are monsters out there. Earlier this month, I finished Night of Knives, the first book in the Novels of the Malazan Empire by Ian C. Esselmont. That's right, folks. I am back in the Malazan universe, and for the most part, it's good to be back. I have just missed being in the Malazan universe. Even though there are things about Malazan that I don't love, there are things about it that bother me. There's just something about this series that is enticing. It always makes you want to read more of them. And after finishing the main 10, I gave myself a year off from reading the books, uh, just for my own mental health, because it was a big task to finish all 10 of those books. But now I'm back with Night of Knives with Ian C. Esselmont, and unfortunately, my reintroduction to the Malazan universe is not all that I hoped it to be. Now, obviously, this is just going to be my personal opinion, and obviously, people may disagree with me, but Night of Knives is, well, to be honest, it's kind of rough. Yeah, going into this, I didn't have the highest expectations. I know from what the Malazan fans on the internet have told me that the Ian C. Esselmont books, they're just not as good as the Erickson books. And Night of Knives, it's his first, it's his debut novel. It's his first time really writing, and just like consider all those things. And yet, despite having that all in my mind about it's going to be his first novel, don't compare it to the main 10, all of that, I just feel like Night of Knives kind of falls flat on its face, respectfully. I'm not someone who likes to go out of his way to critique authors or books. I always try and give my honest opinion, and I always, I think I give fair opinions, and I usually rate books pretty good. I like pretty much everything I read. It's very rare that I'll give anything a bad review. And again, I don't think that this is going to be a bad review, but it's probably going to be a bit more scathing than my typical fantasy or science fiction reviews. Because I just didn't really mesh with this. This didn't vibe with me on basically any level. So I'm going to start with the positives, and then I'll get into the negatives when it comes to Night Knives. First of all, I think Ian C. Esselmont, when it comes to atmosphere, he's really, really doing a wonderful job here. One of my complaints about Erickson is that although I think he's a good writer, and obviously Malazan is one of my personal favorite fantasy series of all time, it's in my top 5, his prose doesn't always do it for me. His writing style, it feels sometimes opaque, or that he doesn't describe things in enough detail for my personal liking. I come from the Robert Jordan kind of prestige. I want you to tell me what everything looks like. I want a clear picture detail. I want to literally smell the bread if there's bread in the room. That is the kind of feeling I want when I'm reading fantasy. And Erickson, he can do that. And there are moments when you feel that, but it's not always consistent. And sometimes it's like, all right, but I want to know more about like Darujhistan. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? And he doesn't do that. Or any other continent. Ian C. Esselmont, on the other hand, total opposite. This entire book takes place on the Malaz Island. It takes place over the course of a night during the Night of Knives. It happens with Caliban and Dancer. I'm not trying to spoil anything, but a lot's going on here, and you can feel that. There is an atmosphere here that feels dark, it feels heavy, it feels filled with magic and mystery and assassins, and you can feel that. You can feel Malaz as a city, as an island. You can feel what it's like to live there, what it's like to breathe there. You can feel when a character isn't in a warren, it feels like they're in a warren. It feels like this weird, mythical, magical place that is otherworldly, and it feels wrong to be there as a normal person. It feels like that. So his atmosphere and his prose, I think, is very, very, very solid, in my opinion. I think his writing throughout this is actually really good. Like on a technical level, line by line, I don't have an issue with this book. I also think the prologue and the epilogue here really, really, really good. The prologue especially is a standout chapter to me. It is just absolutely wonderfully crafted, and honestly, if he had just, I don't know. I don't know what else he could have changed to make me like this book more, but I think if all of the book was exactly like the prologue, I would have been sold. Unfortunately, though, everything else for me when it comes to this book just kind of falls flat. First of all, you know, I've said before, I've read the main 10 books, so I know generally what happened on this specific night in the Malazan universe. What happened with Caliban and Dancer, how they became who they became. Again, no spoilers. You got to figure that out for yourself. If you know, you know, and if you don't, you don't. But like they spell it out in the main 10. They spell it out in the main series what happened to them. So going into this, it was like it's kind of like supplementary information, but to me, it's about events I don't really ultimately care about. And I have nothing against Caliban and Dancer. I have nothing against what's going on in this novel when it comes to House of Shadow, but I just feel like this novel ultimately doesn't serve any real serious purpose besides just information about this event. Like, the story itself isn't very convincing. The plot here isn't all that intriguing. The characters we follow are pretty forgettable. Don't even ask me a single one of the names. I genuinely do not think I could tell you, and I read it less than a month ago. I could tell you generally what happened. I could tell you who it involves in the grand scheme of the Malazan universe, but I couldn't name a single one of these characters. They're instantly forgettable. There's a lady, there's a guy, there's stuff going on, but ultimately, I don't care. I just don't care about these characters. I don't really care about the plot. The stakes here, I already know where they're going to lead. So that ultimately leaves me questioning what the purpose of this novel is. And I'm not saying every novel has to have an absolute serious purpose, but when I go into a fantasy book, I expect to be convinced by it. I want to care about characters. I want to care about the plot. I want to care about the things happening. I want to make it feel like it has a serious impact on the greater universe. And it's just like, if you read the main 10 and then you read this one specifically, Knight of Knives, what do you gain from it? What do you gain from it? You already know this information. Unless you read this on, like, maybe if you read this after, like, Memories of Ice, you wouldn't know this information. But if you read all main 10, which is what I was suggested to do, is read all main 10 and then get into Esselmont books, what is the purpose of this book? And if you're a first-time reader trying to dip your toes in the Malazan universe, I feel like this would be a horrible place to start. There is no explanation for anything going on. You don't get, like, a clear vision of what Esselmont is actually trying to get at. Yes, I think people are definitely smart enough to figure it out through intuition alone. You can probably pick up the pieces, you can probably figure it out, but like it's just not a good introduction to the Malazan universe. Gardens of the Moon is way, way, way better as an introduction to the Malazan universe, and that's saying something because Gardens of the Moon is rough in a lot of people's opinions. Not mine. I think it's goated, but you know that is the general consensus. But this one, it's way rougher, way rougher. And again, if you're a first-time reader, there's nothing here to really latch onto, I guess. Like, the atmosphere is cool, but the characters lack, or feel like they lack agency. The plot feels like it's going nowhere. It feels very random. And the story, it's just not enticing. I don't feel like it has any thematic depth here compared to the main 10, so there's really nothing to hold you on to for that. Really, the best compliment I can give it is that it's short and it's action-packed. And again, I'm not trying to be too rough, but it's like, for me, I just don't really see the point of this novel particularly. I don't really understand what Esselmont was going for, besides kind of a, hey, this is actually what happened with Caliban and Dancer. But, you know, if you read the main 10, you already know that. So it's like, why did we start here? Why was this the book that you wanted to write first? I just don't really know. And with that feeling, it just left me very, very underwhelmed with my return. And unfortunately, it just did not work for me on basically any level. I think the writing's solid. the action's good, the pacing's fine, but everything else that is more important to me as a reader just isn't there. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to give it a 6 out of 10, and I'm hoping that the next one is better.